There are moments in a man's life that arrive not with thunder, but with silence. A folded piece of paper slid across a table. A name read aloud in a room full of people who have already decided what you are worth. For Logan Mitchell, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in October, inside a lawyer's office that smelled of old wood and cold coffee. He sat in the last chair on the left, the one closest to the door, as if some part of him already knew he might need to leave quickly. His two older brothers, Dean and Patrick, sat at the center of the table, straight backs, pressed shirts, the kind of men who had learned early how to look like they belonged somewhere. Their wives sat beside them, hands folded, expressions carefully neutral. Everyone in that room had already done the math. Everyone knew what was coming. Logan had driven 4 hours to be there. His truck had a cracked windshield and a heater that only worked on the left side. He hadn't told anyone that. He never told anyone things like that. The lawyer, a thin man named Gerald Hooper, adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document in front of him. The words came slowly, deliberately, like stones being placed one by one on a scale. Dean received the lake house in Vermont and 2 investment accounts totaling $340,000. Patrick received the downtown apartment in Cincinnati, the family business shares, and a savings portfolio their father had built over 30 years. The wives received jewelry. The grandchildren received education funds. And then Gerald Hooper paused. He looked up at Logan over the rim of his glasses, and in that pause lived an entire lifetime of being overlooked. "To my son Logan," he read, "I leave the property located at 4 Birchwood Road, Clover Falls, Kentucky. The farmhouse and surrounding land, approximately 11 acres. The room was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Dean coughed into his hand. Patrick's wife looked at the ceiling. Someone shifted in a chair. Logan said nothing. He had heard of the property, of course. Everyone in the family had. Their father, Edmund Mitchell, had purchased it decades ago under circumstances no one fully understood. He had driven out there occasionally, alone, without explanation. The family had assumed it was one of his eccentricities, an old man attached to a piece of land that had long since lost any practical value. The house had been abandoned, as far as anyone knew, for years. No electricity connected, no running water. The county had flagged it twice for structural concerns. The roof on the east side had partially collapsed after a storm in 2019. It was, by every measurable standard, worthless. On the drive home, Logan pulled off the highway near a gas station outside of Lexington and sat in his truck for a long time without moving. The engine ticked as it cooled. A plastic bag tumbled across the parking lot in the wind. He thought about the lake house in Vermont. He had helped his father install the dock there in 1994. He remembered the weight of the boards, the smell of the lake water, the way his father had handed him a cold soda at the end of the day and said nothing, just nodded once, the way he always did when words were too complicated. Logan had spent his whole life collecting those nods, trying to read into them something that might have been love. He put the truck back in gear. 2 weeks later, on a grey November morning, he turned onto Birchwood Road for the first time. The gravel crackled under his tires. The trees on either side had lost most of their leaves, and their bare branches reached across the road like hands trying to touch. The house appeared at the end of the lane like something out of a photograph that had been left too long in the sun, faded, tilted slightly, beautiful in the way that broken things sometimes are. Logan stepped out of the truck and stood in the cold air, looking at what his father had left him. And then he saw it. A faint light, warm and amber, moving slowly behind the dusty glass of the front window. He stood very still. The light moved again. Someone was inside. Logan did not move for a long moment. He stood beside his truck in the cold November air, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on that amber light drifting behind the window. His first instinct was practical, a squatter maybe. Someone who had found an unlocked door and an empty house and made a quiet life inside it. It happened in rural areas more than people like to admit. He had heard stories. His second instinct was something older and harder to name, a feeling that sat low in his chest and told him, without logic or evidence, that whatever was waiting inside that house was going to cost him something. He reached back into the truck and grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. Then he walked toward the front porch. The steps groaned under his weight. The wood was soft in places, punished by years of rain and neglect, but it held. The front door was not locked. It was not even fully closed. It rested against the frame with the ease of something that had long since stopped trying to keep the world out. Logan pushed it open slowly. The smell hit him first. Not rot, as he had expected, but something warmer, wood smoke, dried herbs, the particular stillness of a room that has been lived in quietly for a very long time. A cast-iron pot sat on a small camp stove in the corner of what had once been the living room. A wool blanket was folded precisely over the arm of an old chair. On a side table, a single oil lamp burned with a low, steady flame. And in the rocking chair beside the window, her hands folded in her lap, and her white hair catching the lamplight like silver thread, sat an old woman. She was looking directly at him. She did not appear startled. She did not reach for anything or call out or show any sign that his arrival was unexpected. She simply looked at him with calm, dark eyes that held the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades making peace with uncertainty. Logan stopped in the doorway. For a moment neither of them spoke. The rocking chair was still. The oil lamp flickered once and steadied. Then the woman said quietly and clearly, "You have his eyes." Her name was Lily Baker. She told him this after a long moment, as if the introduction were a formality they both understood to be secondary to everything else in the room. She was 79 years old. She had been living in the house at 4 Birchwood Road for 31 years. Logan sat down on a wooden stool near the door because his legs had made the decision before his mind did. He set the flashlight on the floor, beam pointing up, casting the room in a pale second-hand glow. 31 years, he repeated. "Your father brought me here in the fall of 1993, Lily said. Her voice was unhurried, each word placed with care. He fixed the stove and the back window before winter came. He brought wood. He came back every few weeks after that." "To check on you," Logan said. "To talk," she said. "Mostly to talk." Logan looked around the room slowly. He was beginning to see it differently now, not as abandonment, but as intention. The camp stove was small, but functional. There were candles arranged on the kitchen shelf in a particular order, a stack of books beside the chair, their spines worn soft with repeated reading. A water container near the back door, filled. Someone had been maintaining this place. Someone had been making sure it was livable. His father had been making sure. "Did anyone else know?" Logan asked. Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," she said. "That was the agreement." "What agreement?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. In that look was something Logan could not immediately identify. Not pity, not hesitation, but a kind of careful measurement, as if she were deciding not whether to tell him, but how much he was ready to hear. "The agreement," she said finally, "that I would stay and he would make sure I was safe, and that one day, when the time was right, someone from his family would come." "Someone," Logan said. "Or me, specifically." The rocking chair moved once, slowly, forward and back. "You," she said. "Specifically you." Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees, and the old house shifted slightly around them, the way old houses do, not with weakness, but with the ease of something that has learned to bend without breaking. Logan looked at the oil lamp. He thought about his father driving out here alone, month after month, year after year, for over 3 decades. He thought about the nods, the silences, the cold soda by the lake. He thought about a man who apparently had an entire life that no one in his family had ever been allowed to see. "Who are you?" Logan asked. Not unkindly, but with the full weight of everything he did not yet understand pressing behind the words. Lily Baker looked at him steadily. "I think," she said, "that is a conversation that deserves more than one night. Now, before we continue, we want to hear from you. What do you think is really going on between Logan's father and Lily Baker? Do you believe it was just friendship, or is there something deeper hidden in those 31 years of silence? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your answers might surprise you by the time this story is over." Logan did not go home that night. He had planned to. He had a motel reservation in the nearest town, a place called Clover Falls, that was small enough that the gas station and the post office shared a parking lot. He had planned to assess the property, take some photographs, call the demolition company in the morning, and begin the process of turning 11 acres of his father's guilt into something he could at least walk away from with clean hands. Instead, he sat on that wooden stool until the oil lamp burned low, listening to Lily Baker talk. She did not tell him everything that first night. She was too careful for that and too wise. She understood instinctively that a man who has spent his entire life being handed less than he deserved needs to receive the truth slowly, the way eyes adjust to light after a long time in the dark, too much too soon, and he would not be able to see it clearly. So she told him small things first. She told him that his father had called her every Sunday evening on a prepaid phone he kept specifically for that purpose, that he had brought her firewood every October without fail, stacking it himself against the side of the house, even in the years when his knees made the work difficult, that he had a particular way of drinking his coffee, black, no sugar, always standing up, never sitting, and that he had done this every single time he visited, as if sitting down meant staying longer than he had allowed himself. Logan listened to all of it with the expression of a man watching a photograph develop, features emerging slowly from blankness, something recognizable beginning to take shape. "He never talked about me," Logan said. It was not a question. Lily paused. "He talked about you more than anyone," she said quietly. Logan looked at her. "He told me you were the only one of his children who ever fixed anything with your hands instead of your wallet," she continued. "He told me you built a porch for a neighbor once and refused to take money for it. He told me you drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to help a friend whose car had broken down, and that when the friend offered to pay for your gas, you laughed and said friendship didn't run on receipts." The room was very quiet. "He said that?" Logan asked. "He said it more than once," Lily answered. "He said it the way people say things they are proud of, but don't know how to say to the person's face." Logan stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the November darkness was complete, the kind of rural dark that city people find alarming. No ambient glow, no distant traffic, just the sky and the cold and the shapes of trees. He pressed 2 fingers against the glass and felt the chill of it move through him. He thought about every family dinner where his father had sat at the head of the table and talked about Dean's promotions and Patrick's investments, and had turned to Logan with that expression, not unkind but distant, as if Logan existed slightly outside the frame of the life Edmund Mitchell had imagined for himself. He had spent decades interpreting that distance as disappointment. It had never occurred to him that it might have been something else entirely. "Why didn't he just say it?" Logan asked. His voice was steady, but the question was not. Why didn't he just say it, any of it, once? Lily was quiet for a long moment. "Because he was a man of his time," she said, "and men of his time were taught that love was something you demonstrated through action, through provision, through sacrifice. They were never taught the words. The words were considered, unnecessary. That's not enough, Logan said. No, Lily agreed. It isn't. She said it without apology or softening, and Logan respected her for it. She was not trying to rehabilitate his father's memory or sand down the sharp edges of a complicated man. She was simply telling the truth, the way people tell it when they have lived long enough to understand that the truth, even when it hurts, is always more useful than comfort. Logan turned back from the window. "The sealed room," he said. "At the end of the hall. I noticed it when I came in. The door is padlocked." Something shifted in Lily's expression. Not fear, not exactly, but a kind of gravity, as if the conversation had just stepped onto different ground. "Yes," she said. "What's in it?" She looked at him for a long moment, and in that look was the weight of 31 years of keeping a promise to a man who was no longer alive to keep his own. "That," she said slowly, "is what he left you the house to find." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed something on the side table between them. A key, small, brass, worn smooth on the edges from years of being held. "He gave it to me 15 years ago, Lily said. "He told me to give it to you when you came. He said, and these were his exact words, he said, 'Lily, make sure Logan is sitting down when he opens that door.'" Logan stared at the key. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, long and low, like something exhaling after holding its breath for a very long time. "And right here, before we walk through that door together, we want to stop and say something directly to you. You have stayed with this story through 3 chapters now. You have sat with Logan in that cold house, you have listened to Lily's words, and you have felt, perhaps, something that reminded you of your own life, of words that were never said, of love that arrived too late or in the wrong shape. That means everything to us. The best of this story is still ahead. What is behind that door is going to change everything you think you know about Edmund Mitchell, about Logan, and about what a father's love can look like when it has nowhere else to go. Stay with us. You will not regret it." Logan picked up the key. It was lighter than he expected, lighter than something carrying that much weight had any right to be. He turned it over in his palm once, feeling the worn edges, the places where brass had been rubbed to a dull shine by years of careful handling. 15 years, Lily had said. She had carried this key for 15 years, waiting for a man she had never met to arrive at a door she had never opened. He looked at her. "You never went inside?" "It wasn't mine to open," she said simply. There was no performance in the way she said it, no drama, just the plain declaration of a woman who had made a promise and kept it the way people keep promises when they understand that some things are sacred, not because of ceremony, but because of the weight of what they mean to the person who asked. Logan closed his fingers around the key and walked down the hall. The house was narrow in the way old farmhouses are, rooms opening off a central corridor, like thoughts branching from a single idea. He passed the kitchen with its low ceiling and its smell of dried wood. He passed the room where Lily slept, its door half open, a patchwork quilt folded at the foot of a narrow bed. He passed a small bathroom with a hand pump and a ceramic basin, functional and plain. At the end of the hall, the door. It was different from the others. Heavier. The wood was darker, older, as if it had been salvaged from somewhere else and installed with a specific intention. The padlock was a simple brass mechanism, tarnished but solid. Around the doorframe, at some point, someone had pressed a thin line of weather stripping, the kind used to keep out drafts, but also, Logan realized, sound. He stood in front of it for a moment. Behind him, at the end of the hall, Lily had risen from her chair and stood watching. She did not follow him all the way. She stayed at the entrance to the corridor, one hand resting on the wall, giving him the distance that the moment required. Logan put the key in the lock. It turned with the clean, certain click of a mechanism that had been well made and well maintained. He pushed the door open slowly and reached inside for a light source, but there was none to find. He went back to the living room for his flashlight and returned. The beam swept the room. He stood very still. It was not what he had expected. He had not known what to expect. Treasure, perhaps, in the loose way the word forms in the mind when someone tells you a room holds a secret. Documents, maybe. Or evidence of something shameful, the kind of thing families lock away and hope outlasts everyone who remembers it. It was none of those things. The room was small, perhaps 12 feet by 10. The walls had been lined, floor to ceiling, with wooden shelving, and on those shelves, arranged with a care that spoke of hours and intention, were objects. Hundreds of them. Logan stepped inside. On the first shelf, to his left, a small league baseball trophy, its brass plate engraved with a name and a year. Logan Mitchell, most valuable player. Summer League, 1979. He had been 9 years old. He remembered the game, but not what had happened to the trophy. It had simply disappeared one day, the way things disappear in large families, absorbed into the general clutter of a life shared between too many people. His father had kept it. On the shelf below, a report card, 6th grade. Logan had failed mathematics that year and had been terrified to bring the card home. He remembered his father's silence at the kitchen table, the way he had looked at the card and then looked at Logan and said nothing. Logan had interpreted that silence, as he had interpreted so many of his father's silences, as contempt. But his father had kept the report card. He had kept it here, in this room, behind a locked door, for decades. Logan moved the flashlight slowly along the shelves. A drawing, crayon on yellowed paper, of a house with smoke coming from the chimney and 4 stick figures standing in front of it. In the corner, in a child's handwriting, "Our Family," by Logan, age 6. A broken watch that Logan had saved up 3 months of allowance to buy his father for Christmas when he was 12, not knowing it was already broken when he bought it from a neighbor's yard sale. He had been so ashamed when his father opened it. His father had said thank you and put it in his pocket, and Logan had assumed it went in the trash that same evening. It was here. On the highest shelf, a photograph Logan had never seen. It showed Edmund Mitchell, younger, maybe 40, standing beside a boy of perhaps 14 or 15. The boy was holding a fishing rod and squinting into the sun with the particular expression of someone who is trying not to smile and failing. Logan did not immediately recognize the boy. Then he did. It was him. He had no memory of the photograph being taken. No memory of that day at all, or of whoever had been standing behind the camera. But there it was. His father and him, side by side on a riverbank somewhere, caught in a moment of uncomplicated happiness that Logan had apparently lived through, and then completely forgotten. His father had not forgotten. Logan sat down on the floor of that small room with his flashlight in his lap and looked at the shelves around him. Every object was a moment. Every moment was a choice his father had made, to keep, to preserve, to hide away in a locked room, as if these things were too important to leave in the open where they might be lost or damaged or taken. He had not known how to say the words, so he had kept the trophies, the broken watches, the crayon drawings, the report cards with their failing grades. He had built a room out of every moment that mattered, and locked it behind a door that he had entrusted for 15 years to the one person outside his family who had ever truly known him. And he had left the key for Logan, only Logan. Logan pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. He was 54 years old, and he had not cried in a very long time. Not from stubbornness, but from years of practice, from the discipline of a man who had learned early that his emotions were not particularly welcome in the rooms where he found himself. But in that small room, surrounded by the wreckage and the treasure of a love that had never learned to speak, something in him came loose. He let it. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees, and the old house held him the way old houses do, without judgment, without condition, with the simple, steady patience of walls that have witnessed everything and said nothing, and remained. Logan did not open the demolition company's number on his phone the next morning. He sat on the porch steps of the farmhouse as the sun came up over the tree line, a cup of instant coffee warming his hands. Lily had produced a small tin of it from a shelf in the kitchen, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who had long since learned to make do with what was available, and he watched the light move across the 11 acres his father had left him. He was seeing it differently now. In the grey assessment of the day before, the property had looked like neglect, like the physical manifestation of being an afterthought. Overgrown fields, a sagging fence line along the eastern boundary, a barn at the far end of the property that had lost its doors sometime in the last decade and stood open to the weather like a man who had stopped bothering to protect himself. But the morning light did something different to it. The fields, untended as they were, had gone to wildflower in the warmer months, and the remnants of that growth still stood in the frost, dried stems and seed heads catching the low sun at angles that made them look intentional, considered, like something a painter might arrange. The tree line to the north was dense and old, oak and hickory that had been growing long before Logan Mitchell had ever set foot on this land, and they stood now in their November bareness with the particular dignity of things that have survived many seasons and expect to survive many more. Logan drank his coffee and thought about his father driving out here, month after month, year after year. He had always assumed those drives were about solitude. Logan Mitchell had been a man who needed space from his family the way some men need it, not from lack of love, but from an excess of feeling that had nowhere comfortable to go inside the noise of a household. Logan had understood that, or thought he had. He had filed those disappearances under the category of things his father did that were simply part of who his father was, and had not examined them further. He was examining them now. Lily appeared at the door behind him. She moved carefully, but without the performative fragility that some elderly people adopt. She was slow because she was deliberate, not because she was diminished. She carried her own cup and lowered herself onto the porch chair with the practiced economy of someone who has been navigating the same body for nearly 8 decades. They sat together in the early quiet. "How long did you know him before he brought you here?" Logan asked. Lily considered the question, warming her hands on the cup. "We met in 1989, she said, at a grief support group in Lexington. I had lost my husband. Your father had lost something else, something he did not name right away." Logan looked at her. What had he lost? Lily was quiet for a moment. The morning birds were starting in the tree line, small sounds, tentative, feeling out the temperature of the day. "He had lost himself," she said finally. "Or rather, he had spent so many years being what everyone needed him to be that he had misplaced the parts of himself that were only his. Does that make sense to you?" It made more sense to Logan than he wanted to admit. "He was different with you," Logan said. "It was not a question." "He was honest with me," Lily said. "That is not always the same as being different. Sometimes it is simply being allowed to be the same, but out loud." Logan set his cup down on the step beside him. "Why did he bring you here specifically, to this property?" "He bought the land in 1991, Lily said, 2 years before I came to live here. He told me once that he had driven past it on his way back from somewhere and pulled over without knowing why. He said it felt like a place that had been waiting for something. He said he understood the feeling." Logan looked out at the fields. "And then your situation changed," he said carefully. My son had difficulties, Lily said, with the compressed dignity of a mother describing a catastrophe in the smallest possible terms. Serious difficulties, the kind that made it complicated for me to remain where I was. Your father offered me this place. He said it was private and safe and that no one would bother me here. He said he would make sure of it. And he did. For 31 years, she said, without fail, without complaint, without ever making me feel that I was a burden rather than a choice. Logan thought about the camp stove, the firewood stacked against the wall, the prepaid phone, the Sunday calls, an entire architecture of care built quietly and maintained faithfully, invisible to everyone who had not been meant to see it. He never told any of us, Logan said. He told me why, Lily said. Logan waited. He said that what he did for me was the one thing in his life that was entirely his own. That his marriage, his business, his role as a father, all of it had been lived, at least in part, for the approval of other people. But this, she gestured at the house, the fields, the morning around them, this was simply the right thing to do. And he wanted for once to do the right thing without anyone watching, without anyone giving him credit for it, without it becoming part of the story other people told about who Edmund Mitchell was. Nah. The words settled over Logan like something falling from a great height and landing, against all expectation, gently. He thought about the room at the end of the hall, the trophy, the broken watch, the crayon drawing, the photograph by the river. His father had lived two kinds of love simultaneously, one that he performed for the world and one that he kept locked in rooms where no one could diminish it with their opinions or their indifference. The love in that sealed room was the real one, unwitnessed, unacknowledged, preserved with the seriousness of a man who understood, perhaps too late, that the things we fail to say do not disappear. They accumulate, they wait. They outlast us. He knew I would come, Logan said. Not Dean, not Patrick, me. He said you were the only one who would understand what the room meant, Lily said. He said your brothers would see the objects and calculate their value. You would see them and feel what they cost. Logan stood up slowly. He turned and looked at the house, at its weathered boards and its sagging roofline and its windows that caught the morning light and held it like something worth keeping. He was not going to call the demolition company. He had known it since the moment he opened that door. He had simply needed the morning to confirm it. I'm going to fix it, he said, not to Lily specifically, to the air, to the house, to his father, wherever fathers go when they are finished with their complicated, imperfect, irreplaceable lives. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way his father used to. Dean Mitchell called on a Thursday. Logan had been on the property for 11 days by then. He had driven back to his apartment in Cincinnati only once, to collect tools and a change of clothes, and to cancel 2 jobs he had scheduled for the month. He was a contractor, residential repairs mostly, the kind of work that required patience and an understanding of how old things were built and what they needed to keep standing. He had never been wealthy from it. He had never particularly tried to be. He set up a cot in the living room and worked during the days on the most urgent repairs. The east roof section, the front porch steps, the back window that Lily had been covering with a piece of cardboard held in place by a length of wire. He worked methodically and without hurry, the way he worked on everything, and Lily moved around him with the adaptability of a woman who had long since made her peace with uncertainty. They had developed, in those 11 days, the comfortable rhythm of 2 people who communicate more through action than words. She made coffee in the mornings. He carried water from the hand pump to the kitchen. She read in the afternoons while he worked. In the evenings, they sat on the porch or at the kitchen table and talked, about his father mostly, though not always, about her life before Birchwood Road, about Logan's work, his years of moving between jobs and towns, and the particular freedom and loneliness of a life lived largely without anchor. He had not told his brothers where he was. He had not told anyone. So when his phone rang and Dean's name appeared on the screen, Logan felt the specific internal shift that a person feels when the world they have been quietly building is about to be interrupted by the world that existed before it. He answered. "Where are you?" Dean said. No greeting. Dean had never been a man who wasted words on ceremony when he was focused on something. "Kentucky," Logan said. A pause. "At the property?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. Logan could hear, in the background of Dean's call, the ambient sounds of an office, the low murmur of other conversations, the particular acoustic flatness of a room full of people doing business. "Logan," Dean said, and his voice had shifted into the register it always found when he was preparing to be reasonable, which was the voice he used when he had already decided what the outcome was going to be and needed the other person to arrive at it without being told directly. "Patrick and I have been talking." "About what?" "About the property, about what makes sense." Logan leaned against the porch railing. Across the field, a hawk was working a slow circle above the tree line, patient and unhurried. "What makes sense to you and Patrick," Logan said, "tends to be different from what makes sense to me." "The property has value," Dean said, "more than we realized. Patrick had someone look into it. The county is planning a rezoning of that area, commercial and mixed residential. 11 acres on Birchwood Road, properly developed, could be worth something significant. We're talking potentially 7 figures, Logan, maybe more, depending on timing." Logan said nothing. "We think," Dean continued carefully, "that it would be in everyone's interest to approach this as a family asset rather than a personal one. Dad clearly wasn't thinking straight in his final years. The distribution wasn't equitable. A legal challenge to the will isn't off the table. Patrick has already spoken to someone." The hawk above the tree line folded its wings and dropped, fast and precise, into the grass at the field's edge. A moment later it rose again, empty-handed, and resumed its circle without apparent frustration. "Dad was thinking perfectly straight," Logan said. "Logan, he left me that property specifically. You both know that. Gerald Hooper read the will in front of all of us. Wills can be contested," Dean said, "especially when there are questions about the testator's state of mind. And there are questions, Logan. There are things about that property that suggest Dad may not have been entirely—" "You mean Lily," Logan said. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and total. "You know about her," Dean said finally. His voice had changed. The careful reasonableness was gone, replaced by something rawer. Something that in another man might have been shame, but in Dean Mitchell expressed itself as anger. "I've been living alongside her for 11 days, Logan said. "She's 79 years old. She's been here for 31 years. Dad put her here and took care of her because it was the right thing to do, and because he was, underneath everything, a better man than any of us gave him credit for. He was keeping a woman on a property that belongs to the family. That belongs to me," Logan said. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that had not been there before. A steadiness, a certainty, the sound of a man who has recently learned something important about who he is and is not willing to have it taken from him. "He left it to me. It belongs to me. And what I do with it is not a family decision. Patrick's lawyer can call my lawyer," Logan said. Another silence. "You don't have a lawyer," Dean said. "I will by Monday," Logan said. He ended the call. He stood on the porch for a long moment, phone in his hand, looking out at the field where the hawk was still circling. Then he heard the screen door open behind him, and Lily stepped out, moving carefully, her cardigan pulled close against the November air. She looked at him. "Your brothers," she said. It was not a question. They know about you, Logan said. I don't know how. Maybe someone in town. Maybe they hired someone to look into the property. Lily nodded slowly. She did not appear frightened. She appeared, if anything, unsurprised. The expression of a woman who has lived long enough to know that secrets, no matter how carefully kept, have a way of finding the light eventually. What will you do? She asked. Logan looked at the house, at the new boards on the porch steps, pale and clean against the weathered grey of the old wood. At the east roof line, where he had spent 3 days replacing damaged sections, working alone in the cold with the focused attention he gave to everything he built with his hands. What my father would have done, he said. He turned and went inside to find his phone again. He had calls to make. The lawyer's name was Carol DeMuth. She was 61 years old, operated out of a small office above a hardware store in Clover Falls, and had been practicing estate and property law in that county for 34 years. Logan found her through the woman who ran the post office, who had mentioned her name with the particular confidence of someone recommending a doctor they had personally trusted with something serious. He sat across from her desk on a Monday morning with a folder containing every document he had: the will, the property deed, a copy of the official transfer paperwork Gerald Hooper had filed with the county, and a handwritten timeline he had put together from his conversations with Lily, covering the history of the property from his father's purchase in 1991 through the present day. Carol DeMuth read everything carefully and without comment. She had the focused stillness of someone who had learned long ago that the most important information in any legal situation usually lived in the documents, rather than in what the client said about them. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at Logan over her reading glasses. "Your brothers have retained counsel," she said. It was not a question. "That's what I was told," Logan said. "Do you know who?" "Someone Patrick found in Cincinnati. I don't have a name yet." Carol nodded slowly, tapping one finger on the edge of the folder. "The will is clean," she said. "Gerald Hooper does good work, and he's been in this county long enough to know how to draft a document that doesn't leave openings. The property transfer is recorded and filed. Your brother's argument, if they pursue it, will almost certainly center on one of two things: testamentary capacity, meaning they'll claim your father wasn't of sound mind when he made the bequest, or undue influence, meaning they'll claim someone manipulated him into leaving the property specifically to you." "Neither of those things is true," Logan said. "I know that," Carol said. "The question is whether we can demonstrate it clearly enough that a challenge becomes more trouble than it's worth to pursue." She leaned back in her chair. "Tell me about the woman living on the property." Logan told her everything. He spoke carefully and completely, the way he had learned to speak in the 11 days since arriving at Birchwood Road, with attention to detail and without embellishment, letting the facts carry their own weight. He told her about Lily Baker, about the grief support group in Lexington, about 31 years of firewood and Sunday phone calls and a locked room full of objects that a man had kept because he did not know any other way to say what they meant. Carol listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Your brothers will try to use her," Carol said. "They'll argue that her presence on the property, an undisclosed arrangement, no formal lease, no public record, represents a pattern of hidden behavior that calls your father's judgment into question. They may also attempt to have her removed as an unlawful occupant, which would accomplish two things simultaneously: destabilize your position and put pressure on you to settle." Logan felt something tighten in his chest. Can they do that? "They can attempt it," Carol said carefully. "Whether they succeed is a different matter. Ms. Baker's 31 years of continuous residence creates what's called a claim of adverse possession in some jurisdictions, but Kentucky law on that point is specific, and the timeline requirements are particular. More useful to us is the question of intent." Your father's intent in leaving the property to you is documented in the will, and if we can establish through testimony and evidence that his decision was deliberate, considered, and made over a substantial period of time rather than in a moment of diminished capacity, we have a strong position. What kind of evidence? Carol looked at him steadily. The room, she said. Logan understood immediately. Every object in that room is a data point, Carol continued. A trophy from 1979, a report card, a photograph, a watch. These are not the possessions of a man who was confused about who he loved or why. These are the possessions of a man who made very specific choices over a very long period of time with full awareness of what he was doing. That room is the clearest possible argument for testamentary capacity I have ever encountered in 34 years of practice. Logan thought about his father building those shelves, arranging those objects, locking the door and driving home to a family that would never know. I'll need to photograph everything, Carol said, and I'll need a formal statement from Ms. Baker. Her testimony about the nature of her relationship with your father, its duration, its consistency, its character, will be central to establishing who Edmund Mitchell really was as a person making decisions. She'll do it, Logan said. He was certain of this without needing to ask. There's one more thing, Carol said. She hesitated in a way that Logan had not seen from her in the hour they had been talking, a brief interruption in her professional steadiness that told him the next thing she was going to say was something she had been deciding whether to include. Your father came to see me, she said, 3 years ago. He didn't retain me for anything formal. He came to ask questions about property law, about wills, about what it would take to make a bequest uncontestable. Logan stared at her. He knew, Logan said slowly, he knew Dean and Patrick would challenge it. He anticipated the possibility, Carol said. He asked very specific questions about how to structure the will to make a challenge as difficult as possible. Gerald Hooper's drafting reflects some of those considerations. Why didn't he come to you directly? Why go to Hooper? Because I think, Carol said carefully, he wanted someone local to the property involved, someone who knew the county, someone who, if it came to a fight, would know the terrain. She looked at him across the desk. He didn't retain me 3 years ago, Mr. Mitchell, but I think he always intended that you would. The morning light came through the window of the small office and lay across the desk in a long rectangle, warm and specific, the way light falls when it has somewhere particular to be. Logan sat with that for a moment. His father had not simply left him a house. He had left him a legal strategy, a witness, a lawyer who had been waiting without knowing she was waiting, a room full of evidence, a woman who had kept a key for 15 years and would now keep her word in a courtroom if necessary. Edmund Mitchell had been, in his final years, building something with the same quiet intention that Logan built porches and rooftops and the structural things that hold other things up. He had been building his son's defense. When can we start? Logan asked. Carol DeMuth picked up her pen. We already have, she said. The legal challenge lasted 4 months. Dean and Patrick filed in December, 3 weeks before Christmas, with the particular timing that Logan recognized as deliberate, the holidays as pressure, as a reminder of family, as an implicit suggestion that all of this unpleasantness could be resolved if Logan would simply be reasonable. He had seen the tactic before, in other contexts, with other people. He understood it for what it was, and set it aside. Carol DeMuth filed the response on December 28th. She was, as Logan had suspected from the first hour in her office, exceptionally good at her work. She moved through the legal process with the same unhurried precision that Logan brought to structural repairs, identifying the load-bearing elements, reinforcing what needed reinforcing, removing what was unnecessary, building towards something that would hold. Logan spent those 4 months continuing to work on the house. He replaced the east roof entirely. He rebuilt the porch. He restored the kitchen to full functionality. Real plumbing, restored electrical, a proper stove that Lily regarded with the measured approval of a woman who had managed perfectly well without one, but was willing to acknowledge an improvement when she saw it. He repaired the barn doors and cleared the fence line along the eastern boundary and began, in the early spring, to turn the overgrown fields with a rented tractor, working the soil back towards something useful. He did not think of it as waiting. He thought of it as beginning. Lily watched all of it with the quiet attention she brought to everything. She had given her formal statement to Carol Demuth in January, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her voice steady, speaking for 2 hours about Edmund Mitchell with the precision and affection of someone who had known a person completely and was no longer willing to pretend otherwise for the comfort of people who had chosen not to. She had not wavered once. The deposition had been, Carol told Logan afterward, the clearest and most compelling testimony she had taken in decades of practice. Not because Lily was dramatic or emotional, she was neither, but because she was specific. She remembered dates. She remembered conversations. She remembered the exact words Edmund Mitchell had used on specific occasions, delivered in a voice that carried the particular authority of someone who had been paying close attention for 31 years. "Your brother's lawyer tried to suggest the relationship was inappropriate," Carol told Logan. Ms. Baker looked at him for a moment and then said, "Sir, I am 79 years old, and I have been a widow for 34 years. Edmund Mitchell was my closest friend and the most honorable man I have ever known. If you would like to make something improper out of that, I suggest you examine what that says about you rather than about us." The deposition effectively ended there, Carol said. The ruling came on a Tuesday in April. Logan was on the barn roof when Carol called. He climbed down carefully, pulled off his work gloves and answered. She told him in 3 sentences. The challenge had been dismissed. The will stood. The property at 4 Birchwood Road, Clover Falls, Kentucky, 11 acres, 1 farmhouse, 1 barn, and everything contained within, belonged to Logan Mitchell, without condition or encumbrance. He stood in the yard for a long time after he hung up. The April morning was warm, and the fields around him were beginning to show the first green of the turned soil responding to the season. The tree line to the north was coming back, not the bare November architecture of branches against sky, but the beginning of leaves, small and new, the particular yellow-green of early spring that looks almost lit from within. Lily appeared at the back door. She read his face before he said a word. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he confirmed. She nodded once. Then she went back inside, and a few minutes later, Logan smelled coffee. He found the letter that evening. He had known in some peripheral way that there was likely more to find, that a man who had built a room full of preserved moments and arranged a legal defense from beyond the grave would not have left the most important thing unsaid. But he had not looked for it. He had let the house reveal itself at its own pace, the way he let old structures show him what they needed rather than imposing his own assumptions on them. It was in the sealed room, on the highest shelf, behind the photograph of the 2 of them by the river. An envelope, plain white, sealed, with 1 word written on the front in his father's handwriting. Logan. He sat down on the floor of the room with his back against the shelves and opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, dated 4 years earlier. The handwriting was careful. Edmund Mitchell had always written carefully, as if he understood that words on paper were permanent in a way that words spoken aloud were not. Logan read it slowly. His father began by saying that he had started the letter 7 times over 20 years and had never been able to finish it. He said he was finishing it now because he was 78 years old, and had recently been told by his doctor that his heart was doing what old hearts do, and he had decided that there were things that needed to be said before the opportunity was gone. He said that he had not been a good father in the ways that mattered most. He said this plainly, without excuse or mitigation. Not I tried my best, or it was a different time, but simply, I failed you in the ways that cost the most. I know that. I have always known that. He said that Logan had been from the beginning the child who frightened him most. Not because Logan was difficult, he was not, but because Logan was so clearly, so essentially himself from the very beginning. He did not perform. He did not adjust himself to suit the room. He had opinions at 6 years old that he held with a quiet certainty that Logan Mitchell had spent his entire life trying to locate in himself and never quite finding. I was jealous of you, the letter said. I am not proud of that, but it is the truth, and you deserve the truth more than you deserve my pride. He wrote about the trophies and the report cards and the broken watch. He wrote that he had kept them not as a secret, but as a practice, a way of paying attention to a son he did not know how to speak to directly. He wrote that every object on those shelves was an attempt to hold on to a moment that he had failed to honor when it was happening, and that he understood this was not a substitute for being present, but that it was what he had known how to do. He wrote about Lily. He wrote that she had taught him, over 31 years of honest conversation, what it looked like to love someone without needing them to be different from what they were. He wrote that he had tried, in his final years, to practice that he had not always succeeded, that he was sorry. Near the end of the 3rd page, the handwriting changed slightly, looser, less controlled, as if the careful discipline of the earlier pages had finally given way to something more urgent. I left you the house because it is the only place I was ever entirely honest, he wrote. I left you the house because you are the only person I know who would understand what that means. Your brothers are good men in their way, but they would have sold it without walking through it. You walked through it. I knew you would. I built everything in this room for the moment you did. I should have told you all of this when I could still watch your face while you heard it. That is my greatest regret, and I will carry it wherever I am going. But I want you to know as clearly as words on a page can make a thing known, that you were never the disappointment. You were never the lesser son. You were the one I recognized. You were the one who was most like the man I wanted to be and never quite managed. I love you. I have always loved you. I did not know how to say it in the right rooms at the right times, and I am sorry for that. But I said it here, in this room, in this letter, in every object on these shelves. I said it the only way I knew how. Dad, Logan sat on the floor of that small room for a long time. Outside, the April evening was settling over the 11 acres his father had left him. The fields were green and beginning. The barn stood with its new doors. The house around him was repaired and solid and warm. The same bones it had always had, but tended now, cared for, restored to the purpose it had always been capable of serving. Lily was in the kitchen. He could hear the small sounds of her moving, the particular rhythm of a person who has learned to inhabit a space completely. He thought about his father driving out here, month after month, year after year, sitting with Lily at this same kitchen table, drinking coffee, standing up, never sitting, as if staying too long meant admitting something he was not yet ready to admit. He thought about the nods. He understood them now. They had not been silence. They had been the only language his father had ever fully learned, the language of presence, of showing up, of doing the thing even when the words would not come. It was an incomplete language. It left too much unsaid and too many people in the dark for too long. But it was real. It had been, in its limited and imperfect way, entirely real. Logan folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. He stood up. He turned off the flashlight and stood for a moment in the dark of that small room, surrounded by the shelves his father had built, and the objects his father had kept, and the silence his father had filled, in the only way he knew how, with love. Then he walked down the hall toward the kitchen, toward the lamplight, toward the smell of coffee and the sound of a woman who had kept a promise for 15 years and would, Logan now understood, be welcome in this house for as long as she wished to remain. He pulled out a chair. He sat down, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Logan Mitchell felt entirely at home. And so we arrive at the end of Logan's journey, but perhaps the beginning of something you recognize in your own life. How many of us have misread a silence? How many of us have mistaken distance for indifference, absence for neglect, a man's inability to speak for a man's inability to feel? Edmund Mitchell was imperfect. Logan's pain was real. Both of these things were true simultaneously. And that, perhaps, is the most human part of this entire story. We want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered too late or just in time that someone loved you in ways you failed to recognize? Leave your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. And when you are ready, the next video is waiting for you. It is another story of secrets, of family, and of the things we leave behind. We think you will feel right at home.